At the time, I had a Volkswagen Dasher. I had a red Volkswagen Dasher. Got a hitch put on it, hitched that puppy up, and off we were to Seattle. Yeah, and her mother was so distraught and angry that she wouldn't come down to say goodbye to her when we left. Yeah, it was really quite traumatic in that way.
How did your mother handle it?
My mother handled it like a lady. She wasn't, she knew that she couldn't tell me what to do, but she was not happy either. And we made an arrangement that somewhat mollified her, and that was that we would call home every evening, right? And back in the day, you could make collect calls, and the person on the receiving end had to agree or not to accept the call. And so the arrangement we set up was that every evening, wherever we stopped, I would call home, and the operator would say to my mother, "Francis Wood would like you to accept the collect call. Do you accept these charges?" And my mother would say, "No, operator." And that's how they knew we were okay. Right. That's how they knew we were okay.
Welcome to the Zami Nobla National Organization of Black Lesbians on Aging podcast. We are your sound source for Black lesbian herstory. I'm your host, Angela Denise Davis. The Zami Nobla podcast is a long-form podcast format with a nod to oral herstories. This episode is a perfect example of that. It's none your business. It's none your business. Okay, I know that's kind of corny. But it's so appropriate for our podcast episode today. Today, our conversation is with Francis Wood, a scholar and educator whose commitment to the life of the mind is on full display today as we talk about her childhood in Baltimore, her years as a third-generation Black Catholic in the city, and her time in the convent. She was a nun. A Black nun. Hey, y'all. This is a dynamic conversation where we talk about just the gift of what it means to be alive in the world as a thinker, one who appreciates the gift of theology and philosophy, and how we can show up and celebrate the power of showing up in a variety of ways.
My name is Francis Wood. I will be 77 years old at the end of May, and I show up in the world almost in a schizophrenic way because different people in my world know me from different departure points. So I show up in the world differently for different folks. There are people who know me from my academic background. There are people who know me from my years at Georgia State. There are people who know me from my history. There are some people who know me from my time growing up. I have a dear, dear friend who is a longtime ex whom we text one another every morning just to check in. And I also have dear friends and associates from my years in Seattle, Washington. I lived in Seattle for 20 years and treasure that time. I also show up differently as a sister. I am the middle child of 3 children, although my older brother is only 15 months older than I, and I often tease him about our being separated at birth, that I am actually his twin. My younger brother is 3 years younger than I, and adores his sister as he should.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and I feel very fortunate to have the kind of sibling relationship with each of them that I do.
I am so glad you're here as our guest, Uzemi Noble. This is a long time coming.
Yeah.
We've been talking about interviewing you as a guest of the podcast for some time, so now it's a real treat to have you in the hot seat and to be able to be in conversation with you.
Thanks.
Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and any childhood landmarks you want to share with us.
hmm I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. My parents are also from Baltimore. Um, I grew up Roman Catholic. Grew up in a fairly close neighborhood. We literally were one of those neighborhoods where any parent could correct you, where the rule was not about street lights, but it was about dusk. And after after dinner time, in the summers, for example, we weren't allowed to play noisy games. And part of that had to do with respecting the fact that those who had to get up and go to work in the morning deserved a quiet evening, right? So we were, my brothers and I were good friends with one family in particular. We actually mirrored them. The three of us had corresponding friends who were the same age. The oldest was my brother's age. The second oldest was my age, and the younger daughter was my younger brother's age. Um, we were really close with their family. Um, I went to parochial school. Um, was in at St. Edward's School from first through eighth grade. Um, in high school, I attended an all-girls Catholic high school, Seton High School in Baltimore. When I walked into Seton the first day of 1963, first day of school, it was me and 200 and some white girls. The first black girl who had attended there was 2 years ahead of me and came from my elementary school as well. The year ahead of me, class of 66, there were four black girls, two of whom came from my elementary school. And my job, right, according to the task my mother set, was to um, do well, and remember from where you come and who you represent. Um, I had been taught by white nuns for 8 years, so I was accustomed to having white teachers. At Seton, there were a handful of lay teachers, but the majority of my instructors were white women who were members of the order called the Daughters of Charity. Back in the day, they were also referred to as the Sailboat Sisters. They had those big headdresses that were white and looked like wings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
yeah.
Like Gidget.
Gidget, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. The Daughters of Charity. In childhood, we literally played school when I was a little girl.
Mhm.
And I didn't think that was weird or strange or whatever. We had a chalkboard that was set up in our basement. My mother bought us games that were educational.
Mhm.
So, for example, there was a card game called Poems and Authors, and you had to match the poems with the author. Yeah. When I was in kindergarten, I went to public school in kindergarten. My brother was in the first grade, and I was in kindergarten. And back in the day, parents literally could make arrangements with the school. So I attended the morning session of kindergarten, and when kindergarten dismissed, I literally walked down the hall and sat in the classroom when my brother was in first grade. So I get teased about going through first grade twice. Um, I've been a geek or a nerd all of my life, and think and thought that um, knowing things and understanding and exploring and finding stuff out was always a big thrill. So yeah, I enjoyed school. I loved playing school. I loved learning new things. Um, when I was in the first grade, I was sent to the sixth grade classroom to demonstrate what it was like to read out loud.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So it was, yeah, I continued my nerdhood all through school. uh, yeah, it was the coolest.
A lot of times when we talk about the religious experience of Black folk in this country, we always talk about the Black church as if it's monolithic,
Right.
but certainly we rarely have opportunities to do deep dives into the rich history of Black Catholics in this country. What was that community like in Baltimore when you were growing
There
up?
were a number of Black Catholic parishes in Baltimore. Both of my parents grew up in Black Catholic parishes. My father grew up in St. Pius V. My mother grew up in St. Peter Claver. And actually, that's the name that I took religiously when I went into the novitiate, was Peter Claver. Um, the history of Catholicism in Maryland is very rich and deep and complex. In the earliest days of post-colonial life, Maryland and the Archdiocese of Baltimore was the Catholic see of the United States. And SEE, meant they were the mother church, if you will.
Mm.
So the downtown Basilica of the Assumption, which was the former only cathedral in Catholic cathedral in Baltimore, was the mother church for the United States. My grandparents were Catholic, so as far as I was concerned, being Black and Catholic was not an anomaly.
Mm.
Because what I learned growing up was that I was literally baptized on the day I was born because they thought I was going to die.
Mm.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that story.
Um, I was almost 10 months in gestation, and not only did I almost die, my mother almost died birthing me. I was 10 and a half pounds at birth, big baby. And yeah, and was having respiratory distress, and they didn't know whether I was going to survive. And so I was literally baptized that day.
Okay, 10-month
Yeah.
in gestation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
I was a
you
month late being born.
right. I've
Yeah.
never heard of a 10-month. That just
Yeah.
seems
Yeah.
wow. That
Yeah.
because most times they
Poor mom.
yes, most times
It's,
they induce labor. I mean, I've never heard
no.
of anyone who's been
Yeah.
10-month.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
My older brother was actually born at home. He was born in my grandparents' house, at 1022 West Landvale Street. So he was born at home, but I was born in the hospital, and my younger brother was born in the hospital.
Wow. That's just very interesting because I would have made the assumption, but I guess maybe at that time they didn't force women to and they
Forced induced
didn't
labor. Right.
labor. Wow.
Right.
You just came when
Yeah.
you came.
My poor mom. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She went through it.
She did go through it. And she told me the story later in my growing up that she heard them working on me,
Mhm.
right? And she just was praying, please let my baby live, please let my baby live. And so her baby did live. Great big 10 and a half pound kid. uh,
Wow. That is an
Yeah,
incredible story.
yeah.
Thank you for
And
sharing
so
that.
there's other pieces to it as well, in that um, the elementary school that I attended, St. Edward's School,
Mhm.
the parish had just been desegregated, or was being desegregated, the summer before we moved in. And the story has it that the former pastor had said over his dead body, would they be niggers in his church?
Ooh.
And God is good. So the guy had a heart attack in July of that year. Um,
Wow.
and we moved into the parish that August. So yeah, it was quite interesting.
Mhm.
Um, while I was at St. Edward's, I um, played basketball in sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. I also ran track. Um, I did the 40-yard dash and the 440 relay. I was absolutely a Tom girl. I loved being outdoors and walking through woods and whatnot. Um, I I railed against the gendered permissions of my day.
Mhm.
The boys were allowed in the summertime to get together, have sack lunches, and go off in the woods somewhere. Girls weren't allowed to do that,
Mm.
right? And I was furious about that. I remember, I didn't have the gendered assessment or analysis that I later came to understand, but I remember bitterly crying to my mother, "How come Charles and Edward can do X, Y, and Z, and I can't?" You know,
And what did she
and
say?
my mother raised me to be a lady.
Uh-huh.
Um, she said it's not safe for girls. Now, what's interesting is, as I got older in attending St. Edward's, there were shortcuts to going to school, and I used to walk through the woods by myself all the time, and never afraid
Mhm.
anything bad would ever happen to me.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah.
Well, at what point did this third generation Black Catholic girl come to understand that not only did she love the woods and uh, went against gender norms, but that she was attracted to her sisters, the same sex? When did that become real for you, your orientation as a lesbian?
That didn't become real for me until I was out of high school. I always had friends who were girls when I was in elementary school,
Mhm.
and was always drawn to them. I also had boyfriends, but that was, the kind of, you go to dances together or house parties, and you move in a bunch or a gaggle of people you knew, right? Um, in high school, I actually dated um, a guy who had been my elementary school classmate, Michael, who was just extraordinary and wonderful. Um, I really wasn't aware. I'm sure I was drawn to girls in my elementary years, but I just wasn't mindful of it. And even when I went to high school, um, I dated Michael all through high school. I remember our attending one another's proms and dances. I mean, in my mother's living room for years, there were pictures of me at my junior high prom and my senior high prom, both with Michael.
Mm. At what point then did you come out? And I'm curious to see how how your mother thought about that, because she was so into to
Mm,
making you become the
a lady.
upstandable lady.
Yeah. Um, my mother didn't react or become aware of that until I had been in the convent, had come out, had gone back and left for good, um, and met a woman who literally changed my life. And we started out as people do, as friends. I went to the convent. I was in for the postulant year, which is the first year. I entered the novitiate, which is the year that you're cloistered, and a couple of months into novitiate, said, "This isn't for me. This isn't working." And so I went to the director, and she was quite distressed at my wanting to leave. And she said, "Well, what is the problem?" I said, "Sister, I just gotta go. I can't stay here." So my older brother dutifully came out to the mother house. I actually was in an order where the mother house, which is where you were trained, still was in Baltimore, Maryland. So he was literally just across town. So my brother came to get me. I was in the cloister year, so I wasn't able to stay in touch with my classmates. Um, and what I later learned from one of our mates was, um, when I went back into the order a year and a half later, one of my friends said to me, "Franny, we didn't think Lisa was going to make it." Well, Lisa, excuse me, Lisa was a classmate. I entered in '67, and she was a classmate in that class. And we had developed what was decried in our day as a particular friendship, and that meant that you hung out with each other almost exclusively, right? And I didn't think anything of it, you know. Lisa, backtrack. I was the only Black girl in my order and in my class, and the first Black woman had been in that order 4 years ahead of me. So just like when I walked into high school, it was me and 200 and some white girls. When I walked into the postulate in September 8th, 1967, it was me and 32 white girls. What I later learned from one of my classmates was that a group of women came from what was a boarding school that was affiliated with the order, and it was literally on the grounds of the mother house. So the women who came from the aspiranture had heard about my coming. They knew that there was going to be a Black girl in their class. I'm like, what? So
Were they bothered by that?
some were, and I didn't know that until later on. As a matter of fact, about 6 or 7 months in, one Saturday when we were doing chores, I went to put my broom and mop and whatnot away in the service closet. It was a big room where they had the cleaning stuff and a work table and all that. And so I went to put my things away, and one of my classmates, Beatrice Schammel, had been one of those women who was in the aspiranture and who had heard that I was coming, right? And so I walked in and, hey, we used to call each other by our last names, which our director hated. So I walked in and I said, "Hey, Schammel." And she says, "Well, hey, Fran." And she says, "Fran, can I tell you something?" I said, "Sure, what?" And she said, "When I heard there was a Black girl coming to our class, I said I wasn't going to be living with no niggas." And I said, "Oh." And she went on to say, "And I'm glad you are who Frances Wood is." I said, "Okay, Schammel." And we never talked about it any more than that, right? There were our oh shoot, the term is escaping me right now, but it's not like diocese. It's the geographic region that an order covers. So our order to the north, Pittsburgh was the furthest north part, and Florida was the southern tip. So there were girls from South Carolina, from Florida, and so forth, who had never had to deal with any black girls, who only knew the derogatory myths, right? Um, but like I say, I didn't learn about their biases until later on in my year there, first year there.
Did her saying that in your estimation, was that her making you an exception as a black person, or do you think your presence there really gave them an opportunity to reevaluate the biases that they came in to the school with, to the order with?
I think it differed for different women. And I think in Shamel's case, the fact that she would even say that to me meant that she had done a reassessment.
Mm,
Because she grew up in an all-white community in Baltimore, East Baltimore. And the segregation of the city of Baltimore was as real as the segregation in Birmingham, Alabama. I mean, you did not mix, right? As a matter of fact, the parish that I moved into, when I told you about the pastor and his comment, the former pastor and his comment, um, we moved into that parish at the moment, a heightened moment of white flight.
mm,
They were leaving so fast they couldn't get away fast enough, right? And there were still about a half dozen white kids in the school when I first started there. Uh, and I later came to understand that the only reason they were still there was that their parents couldn't afford to move at that time.
mm,
Right. Right. As a matter of fact, I was in elementary school for the first 6 years with a set of twins who we called Dagwood and Blondie because the son was a brown-haired guy and his sister, his twin, was a blonde girl, right? So we called them Dagwood and Blondie, but their names were Sharon and Wayne King. And fast forwarding to when I went to high school, when I first started Seton, I had to take 3 buses to go to school across the city. And early on in my um, daily travels, I encountered Sharon, right,
mm,
who had been in our school up until the 6th grade. And I spoke to her, and I was really pleased and excited to see her. Hi, how are you doing? She behaved as if she had never knew who I was, or never had. Like, why are you talking to me? I'm like,
mm,
wow. Contrast that with her brother, who took the same bus, who went to the um, vocational high school that my younger brother went to. Wayne was on the same bus, and when I had occasion later on to encounter him and spoke to him, he was just fine. It was like, "Hi, how you doing?" Like nothing, right?
wow, wow.
But this woman continued to behave as if she never had met me or never knew me, and we never became friends during my high school years, ever.
You know, that is such a poignant story and one that is so common. You know, we think about the experiences many of us have had when you go to. I went to a Catholic school, but it's not just for Catholic school, but certainly there's that level of that age at which it's okay to play with white kids and it's okay to play with
Hmm.
black kids, but
Hmm.
after a certain level, you're not supposed to recognize
After
that.
adolescence,
Yes, and
adolescence,
and and
right,
for me, it was when I left 6th grade and went to 7th grade. In Wichita, that was junior high, and
right.
the kids I knew in elementary school, when we got to junior high, it's like they never had
Never,
seen me.
right, never knew you, right? Never saw you before in their lives. Exactly.
Exactly. So I know
Yeah.
exactly what you're talking
Hmm.
about. Let's get back to Lisa because I'm interested in her story and how your leaving affected her and what it was like to come back and why you came back.
Um, I didn't, like I said, I didn't learn about the effect that my leaving had until after the fact. and talking to former classmates, right? Um, Lisa and I had become what they tried to dissuade as much as possible. There was a term called particular friendships, right? And what it meant was, you affiliated with this person to the exclusion of others, right? And it wasn't like that. It wasn't like I didn't hang out with or enjoy or participate or play with or study with my other classmates. It's Lisa had gone to an integrated Catholic high school in DC. And so she wasn't afraid of Black girls, and they were normative for her. Um, and we hit it off. I remember the first time I saw her, it was literally entrance day. Um, my my brother and my mother had dropped me off. I was shown my room, and I walked down the hallway to what was the recreation room, which was this very long room that had shelves and games and a pool table and television and all that. That's where a recreation was. It had two doors at either end of the room. And I walked into the room, and over in the corner, I can still see it in my mind's eye. Over in the corner, there were a group of women shooting pool. And I saw this woman walk around the table who looked like a vision of grace incarnate. And it was Lisa. She was tall and slender and moved with like fluid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and as I say, she had been in school with Black girls in high school, so she didn't think my presence was weird, right? Um, I don't know how we initially struck up a connection. Um, I just remember her always being open. Uh, and we are still in touch to this day.
Mm.
Um, so it went in terms of particular friendships. We did become um, one of those sets of women who, if you saw one, you saw the other,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and if you were looking for one, you asked the other one where she was,
Right.
right? Uh, and we never sexualized our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It was what is the term? Platonic to the nth degree, but we were inseparable.
Did she remain a nun?
Many years after I did, yes, she ultimately left,
Ah.
and she is now she's been married to a Jewish woman for I want to say almost 20 years or so, longer maybe.
Ah.
Yeah, yeah. She grew up in Maryland, just outside of DC. And then she lived in San Francisco for 30 years or so. Um,
So you both were two young lesbians in the nunnery, even
and
though you
didn't
may
and
not have
didn't
recognized it.
and didn't know it. Exactly right. Exactly right. It's
Well,
exactly right.
when you left, why did you come back, and then why did you leave again,
Okay.
finally?
I came back because I recognized I was gone maybe a couple of months, and I recognized that I had made a hasty decision. And since they couldn't make me stay, they had to let me go. Right? If I went in and said I need to leave. They had to
Mhm.
let me go. Um, and I'm not even sure what the impetus was. Um, I have over the years come to understand that what was subliminal and not upfront in my consciousness was that my family, my father and mother had been separated for a number of years um, when I first entered, right? And they were getting back together and moving into a new house. And what I now understand is that I couldn't bear to think of the family getting back together and my not being a part of that.
Mm.
Yeah, that's what I understand now. But it took me a long time to figure that out. So how I went back was that I I understood that I had acted hastily, and I actually contacted the head of the novitiate and told her I thought I had left precipitously, and she said, "Well, Francis, we're too far into the year for you to return now. But if you still feel this way in the fall, we'll talk again." And so during that year, I actually was a teaching assistant at a parochial school in Baltimore, and um, loved it. I was with the Munchkins. Had kindergarten, first, and second graders that I worked with, and did music and math. And it was awesome. I can still see some of the Munchkins. Well, they're now 50 years old, but Miss Wood, yeah, I loved being there, and I loved being with the kids. Um, During that year, close to Mother's Day, one of my coworkers had a friend or former neighbor who organized a group of neighborhood little girls, like 10, 11, 12-year olds, right? And they wanted to do a Mother's Day program. And the woman who started the group, Marion, had said to my colleague, um, I wish I knew somebody with a guitar and we could play and whatnot. And so Lorraine, my coworker, said, "Oh, I know a girl who got a guitar. Her name is Frances. I work with her." And so I became friends with Marion, who was the organizer of these young girls, so 10, 11, 12-year olds, to do a Mother's Day program. And so I would leave school in the afternoon, and the neighbor was within walking distance. So I would walk down Edmondson Avenue, which was the major street, and go and practice with this little group called the Bluebirds, and learned how to um, to play different songs with them for Mother's Day.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So that was the summer, or the spring and summer before I had returned to the convent.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I became friends with both my uh, former colleague and this woman who had organized these neighborhood girls. Right. They knew me then when I went back to the convent. Um, when my ultimate leaving, um, I really don't have any clear memory of what that precipitated that. It may have been that the class that I was in I didn't gel with. Um, but I said, "That's it. I've given it a shot twice, and I'm out of here."
That's
Yeah.
interesting because you were able to give us the date when you entered. And
Oh yeah, September the 8th is
yes,
a Marian feast day.
and then to have not a real sense of the leaving is very interesting to me.
Right, right. I to this day I can't give you a concrete. This is what was the tipping point for me, right?
Mm.
Because I don't know.
And I know we're backtracking here, but what ultimately brought you into the convent, and how was that made for you, that
Yeah.
decision made for you?
Interesting. I knew that I wanted to teach, and in high school I really was a fervent holy girl. Um, I attended mass not just with my classmates when we had school-wide masses, but um, I was very um, observant and prayerful. I attended as a junior and senior. I attended retreats with my classmates. Um, I thought of myself as a holy person, and as we went from junior into senior year, and members of the class were talking about where they wanted to go and what they were doing, my brother and I, excuse me, my brother and I, from the time that we were like ninth and 10th grade, had been collecting college catalogs. When we were growing up, it wasn't a matter of whether we would go to college, it was only a matter of where.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that I wanted to teach. And so I began to investigate religious orders that were teachers, right? Um, and as the senior year unwound, different girls talked about where they were going to college or where they were going to. Some other classmates were going into different religious orders and so forth. I had gone to the guidance office to ask about religious orders because I didn't know a lot about them. Both of my parents had been taught by Black nuns. I only knew of a couple of Black orders, but I wasn't particularly interested in becoming an Oblate Sister of Providence. So I went to the guidance office and literally got handbooks on the different orders. The parish that my cousins grew up in, St. Anne Parish in Baltimore, was taught by the teachers at the school were the school sisters of Notre Dame. And one of my cousins had as his teacher the only Black nun that had been in our province, Sister Nathan Marie. Ricky had her for the 4th grade. My great aunt was the housekeeper for the priests at that parish as well, Aunt Regina. And so I had occasion to go and meet with Nathan Marie and was really impressed by her. I also knew that I wanted to teach, so I would be looking at a teaching order. And so I investigated the school system of Notre Dame. Simultaneously, I was applying to college, right? So I had applied, in addition to a couple of local colleges, I had applied to the Catholic Women's College, the Notre Dame College of Maryland. And at that school, that's where my order taught. So I went ahead through the whole process of applying to different colleges and so forth. But before I got responses from the colleges, I had been to an interview with the head of the incoming postulants out of the Mother House. My senior year teacher, who was still my friend, Gloria, her name was then Agulia. She had taken me out to the interview, had supported my entering the convent, was like my guardian angel during my senior year of high school. During my senior year, I worked part-time after school at the main post office in downtown Baltimore. You know, I would go to school, go to orchestra, go to the library and start my homework, go work at the post office from 6 to 10. My bus came at 10:20. I got off the bus at 11 o'clock. My mother had my brother meet me at the bus stop. That was my routine, literally, from the second half of my junior year all the way through senior year.
When you ultimately left the convent, did you leave your faith as well? What was that transition like for you?
Actually, I didn't. And as a matter of fact, I stayed connected to my local parish that was in our neighborhood where my parents were living. And I used to play guitar at masses and whatnot. I didn't leave my belief system. I didn't have a critique of my religion or my order, and thought it was just as normal as rain.
Do you consider yourself a Black Catholic now?
I'm a recovering Catholic,
Okay.
and I'll never not be Catholic. Um, I just am not participating, but I'll never not be Catholic.
Mhm.
Now, interestingly enough, when I left the order, I had college credits from going to our college, going to Notre Dame.
Mhm.
And about a year after I came home for good, I started working at the Social Security Administration. The way that I had understood myself, I always understood myself to be a Catholic girl. I've never resisted that identity ever. But interestingly enough, years fast forward 20 years or so, I actually wound up becoming a Jewish studies major at the University of Washington. And I've been attracted to Judaism like for 50 years. I don't know what it is. It may have been because of my exposure as a kid. My grandfather was a sexton at an Orthodox synagogue in Baltimore.
Hmm.
And some weekends I would go with him and Nana when they went to work after the day after some event, right? So this one particular Sunday I had gone with them, and you know how little kids can be more in the way than help,
Mm-hmm.
right? So Nana had said to me, "Oh, child, just go play somewhere." Well, I went wandering through synagogue, and I came into this space that was like an auditorium, and it was beautiful. It had lovely velvet blue seating and a big stage up in the front. And so I went in and I sat down and I was looking around and, just being curious. And I got this really intense tap on my shoulder, right? And it was grandfather. And he said to me, "No, no, daughter, you can't be here." And what I had done was sat down in the men's section of the synagogue.
Ah.
Yeah. But I've been exposed to Judaism and curious about it much of my young adult and into adulthood life.
So, in the midst of all of this, these transitions,
hmm
at what point did it become clear to you that you were a lesbian?
It was when I was living with the woman who had founded that neighborhood girls group. She and I reconnected with her when I left the convent for the last time. And we were buds and we hung out together. And we did stuff together. And we determined between the two of us that each of us was living in our parents' home. And we determined that we wanted to go and set up an apartment together. And so we did. My mother was distraught. Her mother was not happy. But, what could they do? We were grown-ups.
And why were they unhappy?
Because it was not a commonplace for a young woman to leave her parents' home prior to being married. You didn't just up and leave your parents' home, right? That somehow reflected badly on them,
Mm-hmm.
like they weren't loving you well enough or something, right? So yeah, our generation wasn't the first generation for young women to go off and set up living by themselves, but it was foreign to our parents,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
In their experience and in their family structures, you didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
You stayed at home. If you were an unmarried woman, you stayed at home,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Was she also Black?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, she is.
I made that
Yes, she is.
assumption. Okay.
Right, right. So Marion and I decided we were going to set up apartments together, and we did. We moved in with one of my former high school classmates, interestingly enough, Joan, and who was a white woman, and a guy, whose name I just blanked, but he was a conscientious objector. They shared a 2-story apartment, and he worked at the nearby mental hospital as a conscientious objector. So Bob, his name was Bob. So Joan and Bob and Marion and I shared an apartment, right? Joan and Bob were on the 3rd floor, and Marion and I were on the 2nd floor. We had a living room, dining room, a kitchen, bath, bedroom, like that, right? And so life unfolded as it does. And if I'm not mistaken, by that time, I was actually working at Social Security Administration in Woodlawn, Maryland. And I found myself falling for this woman, but I didn't know what it was, right? I didn't know what that was. And we would hang out. We would, go to parties, or we would go for drives, or go over to DC to the zoo and do those kinds of things, right? Go to the museums and whatnot. And I was head over heels, just totally, unbelievably smitten. And what I later learned is that our mutual friend, the woman who had introduced us, Marion had said to her name is Lorraine. Marion had said to Lorraine, Franny looks at me funny. They called me Franny. Franny. So I didn't know that I was that smitten, right? But one night we were out driving around, and I got the courage to say to her, I have something to tell you, but I'm afraid you'll hate me. Right? And she said, well, Franny, what is it? And I said, I think I'm in love with you. And she didn't say anything. She didn't respond in any way. She wasn't repulsed.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't concur. We just left it at that, right? But she was my first lover, and we lived together for a number of years in Baltimore. And in 1977, it was during a government shutdown. Carter was in office. I had been talking with her about what it might be like to live somewhere else. And I had friends who lived in 2 different cities. I can't remember the first one, but the second one was where Lisa was, which was San Francisco. And so I had friends who lived in my former order mate, Sister Nathan Marie. She and her partner lived in Seattle, and Lisa lived in San Francisco. And so I contacted each of them and asked if we could stay with them if we moved to the West Coast, right? And the person who responded was Nathan Marie, was Cheryl. Her name is Cheryl. And she said, yeah, you could stay here if you come out. And so we made arrangements. We sold and gave away our worldly goods, packed up our personal items in the back of those little baby U-Hauls, the one that looked like a U.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I had a Volkswagen Dasher. I had a red Volkswagen Dasher. Got a hitch put on it, hitched that puppy up, and off we were to Seattle. Yeah. And her mother was so distraught and angry that she wouldn't come down to say goodbye to her when we left.
Wow.
Yeah. It was really quite traumatic in that way.
How did your mother handle it?
My mother handled it like a lady. She wasn't, she knew that she couldn't tell me what to do, but she was not happy either.
Uh,
And we made an arrangement that somewhat mollified her, and that was that we would call home every evening, right?
mm-hmm.
And back in the day, you could make collect calls, and the person on the receiving end had to agree or not
Mm-hmm.
to accept the call. And so the arrangement we set up was that every evening, wherever we stopped, I would call home, and the operator would say to my mother, "Francis Wood would like you to accept a collect call. Do you accept these charges?" And my mother would say, "No, operator." And that's how they knew we were okay.
Yes.
Right. That's how they knew we were okay.
Right.
So I was the only driver. Marion didn't drive. So I literally drove across the continent with a Volkswagen Dasher and a U-Haul, little baby U-Haul.
What types of conversations were you able to have with your mother about being a lesbian? Because I know that that was such an important relationship in your life.
Yeah. My mother and I never had a formal conversation. I think that what occurred was that mother and she actually resented Marion for a good while because in her mind, she had taken her away from me away from her.
Mm.
Right. But she also knew that she had raised me to do what I wanted, how I wanted, when I wanted. I was equipped. I was educated. I had skills. And she basically had to ultimately let me grow up. Right. And we never had a formal conversation. She just accepted that that's who was the primary person in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And she became friends with Marion's mother.
Ah.
They used to go to bingo together. They would play cards together. Our families connected and went on trips to Canada. She and I became normalized within both families.
Mm.
Nobody said the word out loud.
Right.
Everybody knew.
Right.
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 Right. Yeah.
How did the relationship survive Seattle?
It didn't. It survived for a number of years, but then it crumbled when I started working at the Catholic Archdiocese. Marion was actually the secretary of the parish that we belonged to. It was a Black Catholic parish, and she was actually the parish secretary. At the Archdiocese, I was exposed to this whole new environment, right? And one of the things that occurred is that I became attracted to one of my coworkers.
Mm.
And it's like, okay, this is a mess. What else gonna do? What else gonna do? And I actually wound up breaking up with Marion and going to live with this woman. In many years of retrospect, I didn't do it well, and I didn't do it lovingly.
Mm-hmm.
And if I had to do it over, I would absolutely do it differently. But I was who I was then.
Some other choices that you've made and the work that you've done has been to not only teach in the academy, but also to provide publications, particularly around womanist theology and ethics. And I know you have a chapter in Emily Towns' edited volume of Troubling in My Soul. I think that's the name of it. And that was one of the books that I read in divinity school. You know, that whole era of womanist theologians and scholars is so
Yeah.
important. And I
Yes.
know certainly before we leave, I want to talk about that, how you broached that that field, and how it shaped the way in which you move in the world,
Mm.
and your ideas around theology and ethics and being a spirited person.
hmm After I was at the Archdiocese, I was the first minority concerns director of the Catholic Archdiocese of Seattle. And during my time there, close to the last year and a half or so of my working there, we had occasion to sponsor anti-racism workshops. And it was mandatory for all of the diocesan employees in the chancery. The chancery is the main office, if you will, of the archdiocese. The archdiocese of Seattle covered everything from the ocean to the mountains, and from the Canadian border down to the Oregon border. So it was a huge, huge space, and the mechanism of running that entity was centered where the bishop's office was in the chancery in Seattle. And we had occasion for all of the employees of the chancery to mandatory attendance to these sessions, right? So as a minority concerns director, I actually showed up for a number of them. They were led by a woman, Reverend Marie Fortune, and one of her board colleagues, Shayla McCormick Axtell. And the reception of the people who were in the chancery as staff were just, oh man, they were incensed that they had to do this, right? And I attended for observation purposes primarily to see what was going on and how people were reacting and what were the sticky points or the painful points for them and so forth, right? And this went on for a series of sessions over time. And after the last session, my personnel director and the assistant personnel director and I went out to lunch with the session leaders, Reverend Marie Fortune and Chayla Axtell. And we went out to lunch together to debrief what had happened and who did what and so forth. A couple of weeks later, Marie contacted me and asked if I would become a member of the board for the Center for the Prevention of Sexual and Domestic Violence. And I agreed. I thought it was an important aspect of what I did as well. So I was on the board for about a year and a half or so. And when I had left the board, Marie approached me and asked me if I would consider coming to work at the center. I was stunned and thrilled. And she said to me, I know this is a major change for you. You don't have to rush. Just take your time. I'm on your timeline. So she literally gave me months before I made a decision to leave the Archdiocese and go to work for the center. So I worked at the center for about 6.5 years, I guess. But during that time, I had occasion to visit the Women's Center at the University of Washington intermittently. And when I would go over for lunch, sometimes with the director, her name is Angela Genorio, she would say to me, Francis, when are you coming back to school? We need you here. And I would say, oh, Angela, and not right now. It's just not the right time and so forth. But in due season, it did become the right time. And that was the spring of 1991, where I bit the bullet and decided to go back to school. And my first love was actually philosophy. And so one afternoon I went over, it was in the summer, and I went over to the campus and went up to the philosophy department. I walked into the reception office and asked if the chair was there and whether I could speak to him and so forth. And he was there. And so she said, if you can wait a while, he'll talk to you. So I, sat there dutifully. The guy came out. He introduced himself. He invited me into his office. And it was immediately evident that the term or the idea of philosopher and Black female never clicked in his head. It's like he couldn't even imagine it, right? And so he was not inviting or engaging or encouraging in any way. So I thanked him for his time because I have, home training, and I left. And I was walking across the campus, and I said to myself, well, what is your next love? And it's religion. So I walked over to the Jackson School of International Studies. I walked into the reception office there, and got information about the Comparative Religion program. And that's how I wound up going back to school and became a religious studies major at the University of Washington. Yeah.
Wow.
And my advisor and the chair of the department at the time is an Orthodox Jewish man whom I came to love and who shepherded me through the 5 years that I was in that program, because I went on to the graduate program and got a master's in international studies with an emphasis in Judaism.
We've had such a dynamic and wonderful conversation, and I think we could go on and on and on because there's so many wonderful aspects of your life that interest me, and I think would provide great conversation. One of the things I do want to talk about briefly before we leave is how I came to really know you was when you were part of the Sister Harriet Spiritual Collective I led from 2010 to 2016, which was a real spiritual community. I guess that's opposed to being not real.
Not real.
It was a spiritual community that was really created out of my need to have a spiritual space I could sit in with my partner and other queer women to work through all of these wonderful ways that we show up in the world. And then in 2025, last year, there was a need for Zami Nobla and our members to reignite some portion of that, not the spiritual portion, but the circle portion, where we understood that when we gather together and celebrate the power of showing up as Black lesbians, that there is something that lends to our wellness. And so we have done that consistently since March of last year and celebrated a 1-year mark. And I just want you to just speak a little bit about how that Sister Harriet Circle has been a resource for you and the value you find in that opportunity to gather.
I'm almost at a loss for words to describe how I am fed and encouraged in the Sister Harriet Circle. I trust that women bring their best selves and their whole selves to that space, and that there are few places in the universe where that's true. Unfortunately, I find emotional and spiritual support in that space. listening to the ways that women around me show up and their passions and their concerns um, is in some ways validating, such that I know I'm not crazy, and I know that if I reach out and ask for support, that they would be there without fail. And that, I think, is a rare and precious um, resource and gift to me personally. Um, I trust that whatever I place in that space is held sacred. I trust that the women in the circle um, um, trust and believe me. I don't ever feel like there's something I can't say there. Um, yeah, there's a lot that I could say about Sister Harriet, um, and I treasure your having the gift of calling us together in that way. It's your calling us together in some ways that holds us together. You know, understand what I mean?
Yes, and I thank you for that, because as I look at the circle, and for those who are not familiar with it, this is a wellness circle just for Zambia Nobler members. And we were very intentional about that because it is such a sacred space and a vulnerable space. And I will bring reflection, and then the women in the circle will add to the reflection. And we have this wealth, this well, this lake, this river, this pond, this water, this wisdom that I'm always fed from, as we end. It's always such a joy to see how when we show up, we bring something refreshing to the circle. And it's something that I hold as being very unique to our experience and being very important to our lives as older Black lesbians. There's a real joy there for me. And you are such, and have been such, an incredible part of not just the Sister Harriet Circle, but certainly you were such a vital role within the Sister Harriet Collective. And I always appreciated being able to call upon you as a reader and uh, to be a brick in that space for us. So I thank you for the ways in which you have shown up in the collective and in the circle. And I have two final questions. The
Mhm.
first is, I guess, as a segue to that, you have had such an incredible life and are still doing incredible things. And at 77, as a older Black lesbian, what brings you joy?
The life of the mind still stimulates me. My first love, as I mentioned, was philosophy, but sociopolitics of um, Black women in particular and the country in general, I find stimulating socially and intellectually. Um, what brings me joy is the women and some men in my life. Um, I treasure being connected, maintaining a connection to those who literally have been in my life for 50 years, being a beloved sister of my brothers, and being a beloved auntie of my nieces and nephews brings me joy. Um, Staying connected to those whom I've met over the course of the journey that I've been on for the past, I don't know, 50 years, um, brings me joy. Music, babies laughing, um, stimulating conversation brings me joy. So,
When you show up, it's just such a blessing because you bless the space. So
thank you.
I'm always thinking about how you bring joy, um,
Thank you.
and hope you trust that and hold that. The question I end with for all the guests is there something I left out? Or is there a question I should have asked? Is there something you want to leave with our listeners today?
I don't know that there's a question you should have asked, but what I want to leave with the nerds who are listening is to continually honor the life of the mind, which among the wider world diminishes that or claims it doesn't exist among Black women. And I think that those of us who honor that aspect of who we are need to speak loudly and regularly about that. Sometimes I think it feels embarrassing, or that, you get accused of, oh, you think you all that. No, I don't think I'm all that. I just know who I am and whom I gravitate toward and what draws me in life. So to the other nerds out there, I'm reading Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's memoir, lovely one. And as I have read, she's a generation behind me, but as I read her reflections on her life, it's like, oh, I know you. You're that nerdy little girl. I was in debate and speech society when I was in high school. Yeah, I know about you. Someone who is sent into the world to be who they are at all times, in all places. And I find that there have been times in my life when I have suppressed or repressed or kept silent about my love of the life of the mind because I don't think it'd be honored or held in high esteem. So coming out of the closet as a book, not just a bookworm, but as a nerd who thinks the life of the mind is incredibly important to us, is something I want to leave with the listeners.
Frances Wood, the one who brings us joy, thank you for being part of our Black lesbian history.
Thank you, Angela Davis. It's been my pleasure.
It's a joy to be able to sit in conversation with someone as they talk about their life. And that's the way I feel about my time with Frances Wood. Being able to listen as she shared some deep, meaningful, private, public moments of all the 77 years of her life, and how she continues to have joy as she basks in community and in the life of the mind, and reading, reflecting, and being such a joyful spirit in community. Frances, thank you. Thank you for showing up and helping us celebrate what it means to be an older Black lesbian in a time where our visibility is so needed. So we celebrate ourselves, right? If you are a listener of the podcast and you enjoy it as much as I enjoy producing it, then I ask you to rate and review this podcast wherever you listen to it, and to share an episode with someone you know who would enjoy it. Perhaps this is the episode you share. We have a wealth of other episodes that we've created over the past 7 years. And it is just an honor to be able to collect these incredible histories. We are a sound source for Black lesbian history. It's what we say, it's what we do, it's how we be at the Zami Nola podcast. So thank you. Thank you for listening. And until we meet again, have a sweet one.